Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're getting into something that's, well, it's at the very heart of our entire justice system.
You know how it is in the movies, right? There's always some dramatic courtroom moment, a surprise witness, a last-minute confession. But in the real world, things are almost never that clear-cut. So what happens then? When the evidence isn't 100% certain, how does a court actually decide who's telling the truth?
So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at the two main scales of justice. Then we'll see how they work in civil cases. Think of it as a 51% tip. After that, we'll tackle criminal cases, where the standard is beyond doubt. We'll also get into the nitty-gritty, like what happens when a claim gets really serious, the whole problem with the word reasonable, and wrap up with why all of this matters so much.
All right, let's jump right in. The first thing you got to get your head around is that the law doesn't just have one single definition of proof. Nope, it's got two main standards. And which one gets used? Well, that all depends on what's at stake.
Okay, so on one side, you've got civil proceedings. This is stuff like disputes between people or companies. Usually, it's about money or making someone do something or stop doing something. But then, on the other side, you have criminal proceedings. This is where the state itself is prosecuting a person, and what's on the line isn't money, it's their liberty. And because those consequences are just so different, the law says, hold on, we need a totally different level of certainty here.
So let's start with the one that covers most of the ground, the civil case. This is all about proving something is more likely than not.
So the official term for this is the balance of probabilities. And look, this isn't about being 100% sure. It's way simpler than that. You, as the one making the claim, just have to convince the court that your version of events is more probable than not. You know that classic image of the scales of justice? All you have to do is make them tip, even just a tiny bit, in your direction.
The famous judge, Lord Denning, put it perfectly. He said that if the evidence is such that the court can say, yeah, we think it's more probable than not, you've met your burden. But, and this is key, if the probabilities are equal, 50-50, you haven't. It's not enough. You have to get over that halfway mark. It's that 51 versus 49% idea. It feels like a razor-thin margin, but in the eyes of the civil law, it's enough.
But here's where it gets really interesting, because it's not just a simple numbers game. This leads us to a classic legal brain teaser. Picture this. You've got a town, and in this town, the Blue Bus Company owns 95% of all the buses. The other 5%, they belong to the Red Bus Company.
Okay, so one night, there's a hit and run. A witness saw that a bus did it, but they couldn't see the color. Now, if you just look at the raw data, the statistics, there's a 95% chance it was a blue bus. So, let me ask you, based on the balance of probabilities, is the Blue Bus Company liable?
And the answer, which might surprise you, is no. The legal system says no. And Justice Gagler explains the logic, and it's brilliant. He says if we just made the Blue Bus Company pay based on statistics, think about it, they'd have no reason to make their drivers be careful, because they'd be on the hook for accidents no matter what. And at the same time, the Red Bus Company could be completely reckless and get away with it. The law has to be about more than just playing the odds. It's about connecting the proof to the actual event.
Okay, so that's the civil world. Now, let's shift gears completely and look at the criminal side of things. This is where the stakes are so much higher and it demands a completely different bar for proof. And this is the big one, the one everyone's heard of, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. What this means is that the prosecution has to prove its case so thoroughly that there are no reasonable doubts left in the jury's mind. Now, the key word there is reasonable. This doesn't mean proof beyond a shadow of a doubt. We're not talking about eliminating every wild, far-fetched, what if an alien did it kind of doubt. We're talking about any doubt that has a reason behind it.
And this idea, right here, gets to the absolute core of why this standard is so high. It's this fundamental belief that it is far better for people who are probably guilty to go free than for even one person whose innocence is reasonably possible to be convicted. That high bar is our main line of defense against mistakes and against the incredible power of the state.
And this chart just lays it out so clearly. You see that civil standard? It's just tipping over that 51% mark. But the criminal standard, it's this huge leap. Now, we can't put an exact number on it. People say maybe 95%, but that's just a guide. The point is to show you just how massive the gap is between the two. Okay, so we've got our two buckets, civil and criminal. But what about the gray areas? What happens when a civil case involves something really serious, like fraud? Does just tipping the scales past 51% still feel right? And here's Lord Denning again, with the answer. He basically said that common sense has to play a role. A court, when it's looking at a charge like fraud, is just naturally going to need a higher degree of probability, stronger evidence, than it would if it were just deciding if someone was a bit careless.
And this is such a critical point to understand. The standard of proof doesn't actually change. It's still balance of probabilities. But what it takes to persuade someone to that standard, that changes. Think about it. Serious accusations like fraud or murder are thankfully less common than simple negligence or a basic assault. So, because they're inherently more improbable, you just need stronger, better evidence to convince a judge that this unlikely thing actually happened.
But let's be super clear here. This flexibility doesn't mean there's some kind of sliding scale with a million different standards. There are still only two. At the end of the day, the judge or jury's mind has to land in one of two places. Either they are reasonably satisfied for a civil case, or they have no reasonable doubt for a criminal one. There's no middle ground, no third standard.
So this all leads us to maybe one of the biggest, most argued over questions in law. We all know the words beyond a reasonable doubt, but how in the world do you define what makes a doubt reasonable?
And what's really fascinating is how two very similar legal systems approach this in completely opposite ways. So in England, the prevailing view is, don't even try to define it. They think any attempt to explain reasonable will just confuse the jury. So instead, they tell them they must feel sure of the person's guilt. But then you go to Australia, and they take the opposite tack. They trust the original phrase. The thinking there is that ordinary people on a jury are perfectly capable of understanding what reasonable means and applying it themselves.
All right, so after digging into all these rules and legal debates, you might be thinking, okay, but why does this really matter to me? This seems like jargon for lawyers.
Well, it matters because these standards, they're not just jargon. They're the engine room of the justice system. They are how the law tries to do two incredibly difficult things at once. Find the truth while also protecting the individual from mistakes and from the power of the state. It's a law's way of saying, look, we know we can't be perfect, but when someone's freedom is at stake, we have to build the strongest possible safeguards against getting it wrong.
And that really leaves us with a final and pretty profound thought. Our legal system basically admits that perfect, 100% certain justice, it's just not possible. And so these standards of proof, they're not just rules in a book. They're a mirror, reflecting a deep choice we make as a society. And the question they force us all to confront is this: in our search for justice, how much doubt are we willing to live with?